Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Action Comics issue 1004. Lois Lane is back, and finally, Superman has a conversation with Lois Lane about why she's been back apparently on Earth for 3 whole weeks or longer, and she hasn't even bothered to tell him that she's back. She's been hiding away, frantically trying to write and finish a new book, doesn't even bother telling her husband that she's back, abandons her son to a psychotic grandfather in the deep recesses of space to come back, but she thinks her son's okay. She comes back, doesn't even bother to tell her own husband that she's back, because reasons. Well, we're gonna get into those reasons, and we're gonna, beautiful book, beautifully illustrated, and let's delve into this to see just how much integrity Lois Lane has, and let's hold her accountable, shall we, to every bit of dialogue that she provided Clark Kent through the mind of Brian Bendis, shall we? Now, first of all, I want to give high compliments to this book. And by the way, my entire commentary here, it's going to be a little up and down, but overall, I want to be clear that I am, at the end of the day, giving this book high praise for art. The art is absolutely fantastic, and the story is very up and down, and I would suggest that the dialogue's a little off, and I've lost a little bit of respect for Lois Lane. Just a little. Maybe a lot. I'm still thinking about it. I'm bordering on a lot. But it's an underhanded compliment, because I think Bendis has done a good job of sort of chronicling just how screwed up relationships are nowadays, and just how feminism is really destroying relationships, and how men's way of dealing with independent women isn't very helpful either. So this is both ways. So I'm criticizing both genders here, so just bear with me, all right? So, and that, again, that's a compliment, I think, to Bendis in an underhanded kind of way. But there's also some frustrations. Now, first of all, right off the bat, as in earlier issues, we see what I believe is Lois Lane's laptop here. And it's clear that she's writing about truth. And I just want to read something, because I want to illustrate the hypocrisy between Lois Lane writing about truth and the lies that she tells Clark, her husband, later on in the issue. She says, "We are lucky to have someone like Superman who believes in these concepts as a religion. He believes truth, justice, and the American way are ideals worth fighting for and even dying for one day, but there is only so much the man of steel can do for truth." Indeed. And I would elaborate on that, Miss Lane, by saying that one thing that Superman can't do is that he can't make other people be truthful. And apparently, he can't make his own wife be truthful either. Now, what's interesting about this is, it's beautifully illustrated again. I want to give a compliment to Ryan Sook on the pencils. Absolutely fantastic here. Lex Luthor at the end of our last issue had basically unceremoniously dropped in on Lois Lane, who's basically hidden away in some rented apartment, working on her book. And of course, now the tabloids are getting into it, and rumor has it that Lois Lane is now having an affair with Lex Luthor. So Clark Kent sees this and he gets all concerned. And bear in mind, Clark's been a little depressed, right? Because bear in mind, in the span of like the last couple months, a lot of things have happened. The Earth's been in the Phantom Zone. He's been attacked by Robo-Zar. Things have been absolutely going insane. Plus his everyday adventures as Superman. He's got his adventures in the Justice League with the Totality, and then the Magic's gone crazy, and all kinds of things are happening with the Source Wall opening up, with the events of Metal. I mean, Superman's life is absolute chaos. And then John takes off, and his wife leave him. Superman didn't even want his son to go with his grandfather. Didn't want John, his son, to go with his father Jor-El to explore the universe. He liked the idea of being a family on Earth with himself, Lois and John, living as a family unit and trying to have some semblance of being normal, right? That's what he wanted. I mean, who doesn't want that? You want a good family life. But Lois sort of basically talked him into, well, let John, he's getting older, let him go with his grandfather. And Lois would go with him to keep an eye on their son and make sure everything was okay. Well, upon finding out that Lois Lane is back in this issue, he confronts her and says, like, why didn't you tell me? Well, where were you? How's John doing? And the first thing of note, right off the bat, one thing that stands out in this issue for me is that Lois did not apologize to her husband. Now, I just want you to think about that for a second. Lois Lane did not apologize for, one, abandoning their son to a grandfather who has proven to be, well, perhaps a little bit PTSD'd after failing to save an entire planet from destruction, namely Krypton, and maybe insanely sort of attacking them back in the pages of the Oz Effect, if you recall. So she abandons their son to someone of questionable stability, and number two, comes back to Earth in the midst of all these crises and doesn't even bother telling her husband that she's been around. She doesn't even reveal that she's back, and in fact, if Superman hadn't discovered her, she still would be maintaining that deception and hiding away from her own husband. Does she apologize? No. In fact, not only does she not apologize, she implies more than once that somehow none of this is her fault, and, well, they're not a normal couple, so apparently that type of conduct is acceptable. This is what I find a little bit disturbing about this. Now, I'm going to defend Lois Lane now a bit, so just back up. Follow me on this. Lois Lane basically says that she's out there in space, and she sees that John is thriving. She said the minute that they left orbit, John was thriving, and he loved being with his granddad, and she really felt that she was out of place, and she really didn't feel like John needed her, that John needed her. And so I think that reinforced the fact that she didn't really feel needed. And maybe John has superpowers just like his dad. And, you know, her husband Clark and her son Jonathan have superpowers. And, you know, now John doesn't really need her. And maybe she's not really feeling needed. So Lois has a little bit of an insecurity complex. And so she decides she's going to come back to Earth, and she wants to isolate herself, and she wants to recapture some of her old glory and go back to writing because it's her initial passion. So she doesn't, so maybe you can see why she doesn't even want to tell her husband that she's back. She wants to get right back in the groove again and try to sort of recapture the old days again, that feeling again, that nostalgic feeling, because she's been a mother for so long, and she wants to feel like she's back in the groove again because she doesn't feel needed by John, and obviously she doesn't feel particularly needed by Superman. She even tells Clark, she goes, you don't need me. You might want me, but you don't need me. But Clark has to remind her here that I need you, I need you. And when Clark reminds her of that, there's a beautiful scene with her and Clark. Well, they're intimate, and the way that Ryan Sook, the artist, lays out that scene, and this is absolutely one of the best structured stories. This could be a one-shot. It's a beautifully told story in terms of literally panel to panel, and especially the way that the conversation between Lois and Clark as it progresses. It's laid out very well in terms of what they do, and in terms of Ryan Sook having their actions, eventually their dialogue leads into intimacy, and it's very well played out. And you could almost, it's so well done, you could almost see it play out like a movie. Very well done. High compliments to Ryan Sook. The issues that I have with it, and like I said, it's an underhanded compliment, is that it sort of illustrates potential hiccups in the relationship farther down the road, because Lois isn't really honest with Clark. It doesn't change the fact that she did in fact lie to him. And what I hold Clark accountable for here is that he didn't hold Lois accountable. You know that movie As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson? Remember, he plays a writer, and he's in the elevator, and the woman turns around and says to him, "Oh, I'm such a big fan of yours. How do you write women so well?" And he says, "Well, that's easy. I eliminate reason. I think of a man, and I eliminate reason and accountability." Well, that's how Bendis writes Lois here. Lois lacks both reason in this issue, and she most definitely lacks accountability. She doesn't want to be held accountable for her grossly irresponsible actions in as a mother leaving her son in the deep recesses of space with a person of questionable character like his grandfather, and then coming back and then not even having the moral fortitude, or at least the spousal fortitude, or the relationship, or the integrity to, or the accountability to tell your husband that you're back. That's how much faith you have in Clark. That's how much, even if you don't need Clark, because you're telling yourself that you don't need Superman. You know, Lois presumes that Clark doesn't need her. You just want me, she says. You don't need me. And she implies that she doesn't need him. She just wants him. So she greatly insults the integrity of their relationship. That's really disturbing. That's really disturbing. So I was disappointed in Lois Lane there. You can kind of see the disconnect, and I can almost compliment Bendis, because I think maybe a lot of independent women in today's society, maybe they have that struggle. How do you maintain that balance between having to be very effective as a career-oriented goal woman, while also trying to maintain a high level quality relationship with the person that you love? Clearly, Lois has struggled here, and Lois hasn't done a very good job. But Clark here is written like someone who, talk about having super low self-esteem. The fact that Clark doesn't hold her accountable and say, hey, wait a minute, you think you're going to get away with this just by having sex with me? Which, by the way, that's exactly what happens. Just Lois's reasoning makes no sense here. She never apologizes for her actions. She never apologizes for her deception. And she never gives an actual logical, rational reason for not revealing to him why, I mean, I made the wrong assumption that I gave Lois more credit than that. I played Script Doctor a couple of reviews ago, and I predicted that the reason why Lois would be gone was that, and that the reason that she'd tell Clark was that she's trying to find this Red Mist character. She's hearing rumors, and she feels it's a good idea not to be around him, and she couldn't even let Clark know because the Red Mist might know something about them because she's always around. And that would have been a very good in-story explanation as to why Lois she loves him and she doesn't want to compromise his secret identity and their private lives, and so she made that sacrifice, even though it might hurt them. But she was putting the integrity of the relationship over and saving lives over. She was putting that to the sidelines in order to catch the Red Mist. So at least that would be a noble purpose, a noble goal. But there wasn't. This is just plain Lois Lane being selfish, and it was followed by Clark Kent, whose self-esteem is so low that he doesn't hold Lois accountable for her failure, for her moral failure of character here. And that's what I find interesting. So, and bear in mind, this is what makes them vulnerable. And so this is why I say it's an underhanded compliment. On the one hand, I think Lois is pathetic, and I think Clark is pathetic here. They're both pathetic, which I suppose that's how people are in relationships. That's why they fail. They're failures on both sides. Lois here doesn't hold herself accountable. She lacks reason and she lacks accountability. And Clark's failure is that he doesn't hold her accountable for her lack of accountability and her lack of reason. Instead, what he does is that he forgives her, and of course, he gives into the, once again, this is a woman using sex as a weapon to deflect from being held responsible for her reprehensible actions in both with respect to their child and also with her non-disclosure as to her whereabouts for the previous 3 weeks. Think of everything that Superman has done for the world, everything he's been through for the last 2 months, and Lois doesn't even disclose to him that she's around. He had to find out for himself. Just think about that for a second. Unbelievable. Also, I'm gonna now. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go one step further. Imagine if the genders were reversed here for a second. Imagine if the roles were reversed and a man did that to a woman character. If a male character did that to a female character. Okay? Imagine if Clark Kent, imagine if Superman just abandoned Lois for 3 weeks. Just up and abandoned her. Came back and then Lois had to find him and say, well, where have you been for 3 weeks? And imagine that Superman or Clark never bothered to, number one, apologize. Never bothered to apologize. Just brushed it off. And said, I'm sorry, well, we don't really need each other. We're not really a normal couple, Lois. I mean, I had stuff I had to do. You know me, I'm kind of a writer. I have to do certain things. I gotta save people. I can't be around all the time. I just thought it was best if maybe I slept at another person's place, all right? I just wanted to have my own place, and so I slept elsewhere. It's not a big deal. Relax. I know we're married. I know we have a son together. By the way, I don't know where our son is. He's somewhere else, but it's okay, Lois, what's the big deal? Don't make a big deal out of this. Don't make a big deal out of this. Here, why don't we go have sex, and we'll deflect, okay? Can you imagine? I mean, that wouldn't fly, but it flies here, right? Because that's the roles we play. You can get away with more depending on what gender you are. I just find it very interesting. Now I want to give a compliment here. This scene here with when Superman says, I need you, Clark says, I need you. The look that Lois gives him, absolutely beautiful. And then all of a sudden they've had some, there's some passionate intimacy there. It's really well done. And I can't help but to note the comment here that Clark at the end of their intimacy, he looks like he's been sweating. And I laugh at that because I remember in the pages of Justice League last month, Superman put a moon together. He actually reconstructed an entire moon and he never broke a sweat. But apparently after a lovemaking session with Lois, he's actually sweating. So, I don't know, but I'm figuring Lois must be a metahuman of some kind, and that's our first clue. She's apparently metahuman enough that she makes Superman break a sweat. Considering you can't break a sweat putting a moon back together. Wow, I mean, things that make you go, hmm. But the art here is fantastic, guys. Yeah, I've probably one of the best scenes in the entire issue is that there, and this has been on the internet, just a gorgeous scene with them. Although I gotta say, while that's them being reunited, the fact that they've been separated for so long, and Superman isn't even upset. He's not even upset with her or angry with her, and I think that's out of character. I really do. I think that they've got to make Clark a little bit more human and act a little bit more, act with a little bit more passion and emotion. When you really love someone and they hurt you, you can act emotionally a little bit. You can show that you're upset with somebody, and the lack of that here is one of the things I think that's missing. The other thing with Bendis that I think some people are that I noticed that I thought was a little off, Lois kept referring to Clark as baby. Hey, baby. And it just seemed off. It sounded, Bendis is giving Lois the voice of it's like she's a 17-year-old teenager who's making love, losing her virginity to her boyfriend out on prom night, calling him baby all the time, baby. They've been together for 13 years. They've been married for 13 years. They got a 13-year-old son. I just have a hard time believe that she's going to call him baby. It didn't quite sound right. Again, it's a nitpick. It is a nitpick. It just didn't sound right. And I got to tell you that, and maybe you guys, please correct me on this. Feel free to correct me on this, because maybe I am absolutely wrong on this, but I don't recall, and maybe I'm going to end up eating my words, but I don't recall Tomasi and Gleason ever have Lois. Did Lois call Clark baby all the time? Refer to him affectionately as baby? I think it was honey, but I don't recall it baby. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And if I'm wrong, scratch everything I just said, but it just seemed off here. Especially since she's talking as if, it's not a big deal, and he's supposed to be so nonchalant, forgiving about what her actions are. This would be deeply concerning to me, that Lois thinks that their lives aren't normal and that somehow they have an excuse to do whatever it is that they want to do because their lives aren't normal, and that somehow excuses her conduct. Everybody's got different challenges. She happens to have a husband who flies and there's people who flies and rescues people. There's people that are married to cops, to firemen, to CEOs, whatever, and they don't have any excuses either. And so this nonsense that Lois is spouting about, well, we're different, as a way to try to excuse her lack of accountability, I thought was really pathetic. And again, I really wish Clark Kent would have showed some backbone here and stood up to her and said, this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough. What are you doing writing a book on truth? I mean, she's writing a book on truth and she's lying to her husband. Think about that. She's writing a book on truth. She's lying to Clark Kent all the time. She's a liar. She lacks integrity. And if you're lying with someone in your personal life and you're writing a book on truth and fake news, because that's what Lois is doing. Are you serious? And you're giving it to Cat Grant, a gossip columnist, somebody who perverts the truth on a regular basis? That's the only person who's read your book so far? Seriously, Lois? Are you kidding me? I'm sorry, but there's multiple things wrong on this thing. But anyways, it's got me curious. And again, this is all an underhanded compliment to Bendis, because by doing that, he's making Lois very flawed. And I think the relationship is headed for a fall, or it ought to be, because this is not a healthy relationship. It just isn't. But so be it. At least it's got some drama, and that's what I kind of like about it. And so at the end of the day, I got to give kudos to Bendis, because the writing here kind of pissed me off, but it was kind of a good story too, because it got under my goat, and that's what I like. It's not just by the numbers stuff. This is good stuff. This is good in a bad way, and bad in a good way. You know what I mean? And the art's fantastic. So guys, sorry for the rant here, but Pick this up, Action Comics, it's well worth it. And until next time, just hit the subscribe button, follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40, and Comic Boom, out.